well. The cards are going out. I'm going to ask her a few questions to get things started, and we'll collect the cards. So I'll give Chrissy the layout.
Standing here instead of at the microphone, so if you can't hear me for some reason, will you please just let me know. And thank you very much to Jessica and for everyone who's helped organize this and who's been here to make sure that this kind of event can happen. And thank you to all of you who have clearly taken time out of your private and personal lives 11 months in advance of this particular event to be able to learn about our process and about who I am, and I'm really appreciative of that and for you for that. I also really want to recognize that there are people in the audience, many of us, who really worked very hard in the 2017 election process, some of whom actually were candidates themselves and who won as a result of the very hard work of all of us on their behalves. I'm really grateful for you and for the work that you've done in 2017 in preparation for us in 2018. So thank you and welcome again. Some of you guys, you've heard me speak before. Some of this will be redundant, repetitive, as people in the military say, and some of it will be a little bit new for you. But what I'd like to do is to take the better part of 10 or 12 minutes and just tell you a little bit about my background, a little bit about kind of who I was before the 2016 election process, and hopefully that will help you understand kind of what my values are and what I have stood for the first 30 or so years of my adult life. I'll hopefully transition that into a little bit of a great, that's who you are, but why are you running for Congress? You know, what do you hope to accomplish and what is it that has motivated you to run? And that's largely informed by my background and my past, but it's also, frankly, as many of you sitting in this room, was influenced by the results of the 2016 election. And that's my main motivation for running. Among others. And then I will conclude a little bit with what you guys want to hear from a candidate forum, as it is, which is why do you think that you're the right candidate and why do you think that you will win? Because I think that's just as important as all of the lead up to that. So if y'all got me for 10 minutes or so, just settle in and I will hopefully entertain you for that large part of the 10 minutes. My name is Chrissy Houlihan. I am running for the 6th Congressional District, and many of us, hopefully all of us, are sitting in the 6th Congressional District. If the Representative Ryan Costello is your current representative, I'm your future Congresswoman. So I'm very happy. And importantly, for those young folks who are in the room, and even us old folks, we are the largest state in the nation where there are no women in Congress. And that's a pretty pathetic thing to say. Out of the 18 seats that we have, exactly none are filled by women. So I hope to also help ameliorate that problem. By way of background, politicians usually start with something about their family life. My family life, we were talking earlier, many of us are veterans. My father and my grandfather were both career naval officers. What's interesting is that my father also was a Holocaust survivor himself. He was smart enough to marry the boss's daughter. My grandfather was the skipper of my dad's squadron. She was a 19-year-old child bride, and fortunately my grandfather didn't ship my dad off, or I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today. So that very much informs who I am, both my dad and my grandfather's service, and my mom and my grandmother's service as well, and also the fact that my dad came here as a 5-year-old and had the opportunity to create the life that created me. So that's really an important part of who I am. I did follow in the family footsteps. I joined the military right after school. I went to Stanford undergrad and I majored in engineering. I had an ROTC scholarship. I had the opportunity to go up to Hanscom Air Force Base, and that's where I served in the Air Force as an engineer. And kind of relevant to today's headlines, I was serving in the Strategic Defense and Air Defense Initiative programs in something called Advanced Plans and Concepts. And basically that was anti-ballistic defense missile programs that were looking into how we would defend ourselves against those sorts of attacks for 25, 30 years from then, which is right now, actually. And so it's sort of relevant what has come to fruition in terms of North Korea, in terms of Israel, and a variety of other places. After serving there, I had the chance to complete a graduate degree at MIT, also in engineering. Had the chance at that point in time to come down to our community, and thankfully have had the opportunity to live in our district ever since. We were talking earlier that the life of a Navy brat is pretty wandering and peripatetic. I think that's the right word. And we didn't have a very much of an opportunity to ever be in one place longer than a year, so it was really important for me to stay put after the opportunity to have my 2 babies. I have 2 girls who are now 25 and 23, to stay put in our community. So I've lived in Devon and in Malvern ever since for the last 25 years. I had the chance to come down here to join some friends of ours who had started a t-shirt company, of all things. And as you can imagine, my parents and my husband's parents did not think this was a terrific idea or use of our fine educations. And what we ended up doing is helping scale an organization that is called And One Basketball. And One Basketball, back in the day, not too long ago, was a street basketball brand. Started as a t-shirt company right here in our area, grew to about $250 million in sales over the course of 10 or 11 years. I was the first woman there, the first mom there, the first person who didn't play basketball there. And it was my job to scale the organization. So I served as the chief operating officer in that company. And I was incredibly proud of the journey of that organization. And importantly, it was headquartered right here in Paoli, just behind the Paoli Hospital. What I was even more proud of than just growing that organization was the really fine corporate culture that we had there. And I want to put you back into the mid-90s and early 2000s. Everyone had health care. Everyone had access to several weeks, as many as 5 weeks of vacation, no matter how long they'd been with the company. 40 hours of community service, 5% of our profits went to educational philanthropic efforts in recognition of the fact that our basketball players would not most likely be professional hoopsters, but they would probably need a good education. Dogs at work, kids at work, nursing rooms at work, basketball courts at work, a gym at work, your dry cleaning picked up, your prescriptions dropped off, or your car wash in the back of the parking lot. All of those things, because that's the kind of environment that we wanted to foster back in the 90s as young parents and young people. And if you can sort of put yourself into this tech day right now, that is very much what you recognize in Facebook or Google or those kinds of things. But this was in Paoli in the 90s. After that, had the opportunity, the company was sold about 11 years ago, and sadly the person who bought it did not value those same things that we did, and as a result we started another company, and this company is in Berwyn, Pennsylvania, so just down the block, called B-Lab. It is a nonprofit, and we'll go into this a little bit more detail in the question and answers, but it basically supports for-profit businesses that are hoping to do something different with the economy and with capitalism. They're hoping to consider more than just privacy, shareholder privacy. They want to consider the environment, they want to consider their employees, they want to consider their communities legally, and this until the benefit corporation movement wasn't something that you could legally do. And so now, as a result of this tiny little company in Berwyn and a variety of other people around the country, 38 different states, you can now legally be incorporated as a benefit corporation or a B corporation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is a remarkable change in the way that we can run businesses, and it's a complete opt-in opportunity. It's not something that anybody is mandated to do. Had the opportunity to be the COO there. At that point in time, I got a little bit of an itch to continue to help in a different way, but I wanted to take my ops and finance experience into education. I thought before this most recent election, or actually the one before that, that was the biggest and most important thing that we could help as civilians, is help the fight in education. So I quit my job, I went back to Penn, I retook chemistry, I retook biology, and I joined the Teach for America Core program. And I taught chemistry at 11th to 11th graders in the North Philadelphia area at Simon Gratz. Had a really cool experience there. The whole point of doing that was I really wanted to understand what our challenges were in the classroom, and I learned very much firsthand that our biggest challenge is our children can't read. And so if they cannot read, they cannot take chemistry. And if they can't take chemistry, they can't serve in our economy and have good jobs that are respectful and jobs with dignity. And so for the final 5 years before the election, I had the final opportunity to scale a very last company called Springboard Collaborative, which is Philadelphia-based. And basically Springboard, again, is a nonprofit that focuses on early childhood literacy. So pre-K through 4th grade kids, just in our most underserved communities, helping them to close that reading gap that inevitably develops between them and their suburban peers over the course of the first several years of their lives, their educational lives. I was the president and chief operating officer there. Again, it was a startup. It now serves about 4,000 kids in several different states. Not an expert in basketball, not an expert in literacy, but I do know how to grow companies, and that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years. And so hopefully you've got an idea of kind of who I am and what I've represented and what my values are over the course of the first quarter century of my life. I really did think that I was doing my part to help advance things that were important to all of us, whether security or business or education. And I really did think our government was doing its part too, slowly and not aggressively enough, but in general in the right direction. And as we started, I really don't think that that was the case any longer on November, I guess it was 8th in the evening at about 9:30 at night, when Pennsylvania fell and when it turned red. And I was sitting with my daughter. My oldest is now 25. She had come home to knock doors with me and to get Hillary elected. And we had that sinking feeling, which many of you share, where something had terribly gone wrong in our nation. And it wasn't just, the bad guys won and the good guys lost. I've been raised in a military family. You salute smartly, you carry on, the democracy spoke, get up and get over it. This was very different, and I think over the course of the last 9 or 10 months, we've been shown that this is a very different situation. And so it was at that point that I started thinking about running for something, for anything, for what, I had the experience in talking to my oldest daughter, who would then at that point, after the election day, would literally not leave the house for the next week and a half because she's a member of the LGBTQ community. And her idea was, I'm not leaving, I'm scared, my people that I love and know are scared, I'm gonna hide under the bed. I talked to my dad immediately after the election, we talked about a Navy officer, but also a Holocaust survivor, and he explained to me that we needed to start actively thinking about hiding people in our basement once again. And so if those two people were telling me that we needed to do something, that was my kind of wake-up call that I'm in a really good place in my life, in my professional career, and I have a lot of the right passions, I hope, and a lot of the right experience to hopefully serve on our behalf to help make a difference in Congress. And so that's why I'm running, and that's who I am. And now we'll transition into the final part of my speech, which is to tell you a little bit about, well, great, but can you win, and why are you the right candidate? So I'm a Democrat, and I will tell you that I'm also a super competitive person, and I did a lot of exploring to make sure that it was possible for a super competitive Democrat to win. And what I discovered is this. We sit in a district which is actually really unique for those of us who are not from around here. 23 districts in the country where we voted for Hillary, but we also have a Republican in Congress. So 435 districts in the entire nation, and only 23 of them have that really special combination. I'm running against Representative Ryan Costello, who's a Republican. He also happens to be only in his second term, so considered to be quite vulnerable of those 23 districts, one that is not one that's kind of a gimme for them because he hasn't been around a long time. He's also voting very much more conservatively than our very purple place on the planet would like him to vote. He's voting about 93 to 94% of the time with the Trump or Ryan agenda, depending on how you define the agenda, which in my opinion does not represent who we are as a people, a very moderate and purple people. So I believe that Ryan Costello is vulnerable for all of those reasons. I'm sorry, the other thing that I discovered is that Casey and Wolf, both at the top of the ticket this time around, also won in our district. So it's clear that Democrats can win with different kinds of personalities and different kinds of backgrounds. So that's the demographics and why I think somebody can win, a Democrat can win. And the next question is, well, why do you think that you're the right person? Importantly, I've been running now for almost 8 months aggressively. I think it's really important to keep this field as clear as possible. And right now I am the only person who has formally filed with the FEC to run. And I want to keep it that way. I want to make sure that we're keeping our time and our treasure focused on the main chance. And so that's my main goal in having run as hard as I have been for so long. I also believe that I'm the right kind of candidate at this time with the right kind of experience. I genuinely believe I stand in contrast to Representative Costello, who is a career politician, depending on who you talk to, has been running for office since 6th grade, high school, or 22. I've gotten all kinds of different stories, but he just effectively has that sort of narrative, which is kind of always running for something, always running for the next. And I think we deserve better than that. I think we deserve somebody who is trying to take what they know and love and have learned on our behalf to Washington. And the last thing that I would say that would qualify me is that although I've never run for office before, I really believe that this is basically a startup. I have the opportunity to build something that amounts to a $4 to $5 million enterprise over the course of the next 11 months now, and I know how to do that. That I recognize. 50.1% I recognize as the goal. I recognize how to build a team that can win. I understand what mission is. I think this is something that we can do. And so with all of that, those are all the things and reasons why I think I can win. The last set of reasons why I think that I can win, if you don't believe me or any of those things, is that there are these outside organizations that have been very active in helping. Organizations that are called validators, or people who support you, who kind of tell the rest of the nation that this is an important race. Emily's List is an organization that supports women getting elected to Congress. I was their second person who they chose. I also was endorsed by votevets.org, the second person they chose in the nation as well. By End Citizens United, really important to all of us who'd like to see money out of politics, the second candidate to be chosen in the nation for that. By New Politics, a group that supports people with volunteer backgrounds as well, and by many of our sitting congressmen here in our state as well. So all of those guys are telling you, hopefully, that this is a race that they believe in and that I'm a candidate that can win. Thank you. And if you don't believe any of that, I hope that you will believe the NRCC chair, who declared this to be a bellwether race in the nation, and that he has his eyes on this candidate and on Representative Costello in the national race to hopefully flip the House. So I believe we're in a really cool part in the country right now with a really exciting opportunity to win and to flip this seat and to make a difference. And with that, I will say thank you very much for the chance to tell you every bit of my life and a little bit of why I'm running and a little bit of why I think that we will win. And thank you so much. Thank you. And I actually, the question is that there's an ad out, a negative ad out against me and my campaign and my candidacy, and it talks about &1, the basketball apparel and footwear company that I helped run. And it specifically talks about overseas conditions. And I would welcome the opportunity to talk about this situation and this particular question. Thank you for asking it. Because it's really important to me. It's literally fundamental to who I am and core to who I am as a person. Going all the way back to kind of where we started, when I had the opportunity to start thinking about running for office, I asked a lot of people for help. After I had decided to run, I had the really special opportunity to talk to Senator Tammy Duckworth on the phone. A really amazing person, woman obviously, definitely veteran, Purple Heart, lost several of her limbs in war, and has had the experience of running for Congress and now for Senate as well. And I early on got to have the chance to talk to her and say, what am I in for? What is this going to be like? How is this going to look? And she had some really sage wisdom, and that was, they are going to take the very things you are most proud of, and they are going to attack you for that. And she said, in my case, I'm a woman and I'm a veteran, and I'm enormously proud of both of those, and that's what it was that they chose to take me down on. Now for me, and I thought that was an amazing advice, for me, I'm obviously a woman and a veteran too. I'm expecting that at some point that might come down on me too, but what they actually decided to go at me for very early on is &1. And to kind of go all the way back to our story, how we started talking about my folks, our employees at &1, and how important our community was. From the get-go, our community was enormously important. What was equally important, not just our employees, was also the entire supply chain, the entire food chain of people. In early days, the only ways that we could compete as 20-somethings in a global world, a global industry, was to be really good teammates and to have the best team. And that didn't just mean our employees, that meant everyone. That meant our suppliers and our vendors, and it meant our our customers. It meant everybody had to be on the same team. And so domestically, that was very important to us. In the mid-90s or so, we transitioned out of being a t-shirt and primarily a t-shirt company into being a footwear company as well. And if, for those of us who are old enough, you can put yourself back into the mid-90s, you'll remember that that was a point of inflection in the footwear and apparel industry. There was a lot going on, a lot of conversations about overseas conditions. And one, as big as I thought we were at 200, actually at that point we were $70 million, was a tiny little player in this sea of global, manufacturing. And so we had the opportunity to actually play at this very early on and make sure that we had an impact on making sure that corporate social responsibility was top of our agenda. And something, even though we were only 70 million and the Nikes of the world were at 20 billion, and remember, we were number 2 in basketball. They were 20 billion and we were 250 million. We really addressed the issue of corporate social responsibility aggressively. And what did that look like? We joined the Businesses for Social Responsibility community. We sat at the table with the Nikes and the Disneys and all those guys, trying to make sure that we were focused on issues of humanitarian issues and also workplace conditions and environmental conditions. We created a corporate social responsibility group in our office, separated it away from the operations because that would be kind of conflict of interest. We made sure we established a very rigorous code of conduct, which we established with all of our vendors. And importantly, none of us actually manufactures in our own factories. All of these are third-party vendors. And so that code of conduct is shared with everyone. There are standards that you are asked to meet. There are audits and inspections that are made in factories, and they are random. And if people don't comply with those, there are cures. There are courses of action that the factory and that the company are going to do. And so to be specific, for those of you who didn't see what the ad said that there was a report 15 years ago that was put out about Puma, to Puma, addressed to the Puma CEO about conditions in one of their factories. It mentioned in the report "and one" twice. And so the answer to this question is, this report was about Puma, addressed to Puma. Is it possible that any of those kinds of things ever happen at any factory at any point in time? Absolutely. That's what corporate codes of conduct are for. That's what codes of responsibility and CSR departments are for, to see those issues and to correct them immediately. And this was such an important thing for us as a community that after And One was sold, we started the Benefit Corporation. We started making sure that everyone in the entire economy could worry about these same issues that we were worried about, that we were giving people the opportunity to create companies, for-profit companies that worried about these things. And so if you can now visualize, when I told you that 38 states have now legalized this corporate form that worries about the entire supply chain, that worries about internalizing the costs of the damages of society, 38 states have passed that legislation. And I want you to close your eyes and visualize the map of the US, the Democratic and Republican map. Red is what you'll visualize. If 38 states said that this kind of legislation is good and important, and almost all of them passed it bipartisanly, in some cases unanimously, this is a really good idea of how to worry about and be responsible for business. 80% of our economy is for-profit businesses, and this is one of the things I am most passionate about and most proud of. And if I have the opportunity to join Congress, it's one of the things that I hope to bring on our behalves and to be able to participate in committees and communities that worry about these very issues on a global and domestic level as well. And thank you for the opportunity to speak about that.
As a follow-up, if you go to Congress, and bear in mind that freshmen cannot get their grades, but ultimately, once you've been there for several terms, what kind of committee specifically would you like to serve on?
So the things that I'm really most passionate about directly translate to what I've spent my kind of career on, which is I'm really interested in STEM education and STEAM education. And STEAM, for those who aren't familiar with that term, first of all, some people are not familiar with STEM, so let's start there. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I'm really interested in making sure that we are ready as a nation, both young people and older people, to address jobs of tomorrow and have the skills for that. But STEAM is that with an addition of arts, the arts too. So I think that that's important. So I'd like to be working on that. There are a variety of different committees that worry and work on those. Veterans opportunity committees, there's K-12 committees, there's higher ed committees. Those are things that I'd be interested in. The next thing that I'm most passionate about, having done this only one time now, is campaign reform. I would really like to be aggressively involved in campaign reform, and I say that without the finance part because it's beyond just the finance, and yes, we need to get the money out of politics. The whole thing's a mess. The idea that I'm standing in front of you 11 months before this event, and I've been running 80 hours a week for the last 8 months to do this opportunity to serve for 2 years to start over again. Like, we've got to figure out a way as a nation that we can talk to each other a little bit better than that. And yes, we need to figure out a way to finance these things more responsibly. So there are very few committees that actually address those things, and so I'm interested in figuring out where I can fit myself in to be addressing those. And then the final thing that I'm actually really interested in is biosecurity and cybersecurity. And I really think that these are sort of the boogeymen in the closet that we are all really kind of not talking about. To some degree, we talk about cybersecurity with the most recent election. But I really would like to serve on committees that address those issues as well, and Homeland Security and the intelligence committees as well.
Cool. Completely switching gears.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm a constituent of Ryan Costello. Every week, he sends out an email, and on the right-hand side is a column where they've got a question and they've got answers that in some way sort of kind of relate to the question. And then you fill it out every week, as you do. And then
I want to write something else on mine, but she answered this question already. I gotta think. I just gotta think of another question now.
My question to you is a transparency question.
Yeah, and so I think that this is a really interesting question, and I've asked as we've talked about, a kind of a neophyte candidate, and some of the things that I am used to doing, though, is running organizations that have key performance indicators or, metrics of success, or, at N1 it was number of days shipped into the window, or percent complete, or, that kind of thing. At Springboard, when I was teaching, helping to teach kids, it was number of months of progress that people gain. We were measuring very specific things. And so I've been shocked, honestly, as well, by the lack of transparency in Congress. And when I started down this rabbit hole of, how do I talk about constituent services and say that I'm going to be better at it if I can't ask my own congressman, what does he do, and how does he do it, and how good is he at it? And what I was told is, that's just the law. That's the way that Congress is written, and we can talk about ways it's written for other protections for congressmen too. You just can't ask those questions. They are not available to you publicly. And I think that's abhorrent. And I think that the idea that you can run constituent services and not be transparent about what it is or why you're doing it is something that I really want to change. I've had the opportunity to talk to a couple of Congress people, interestingly enough, all women, who do have active and open, transparent constituent services, and I would like to model my constituent services after them. I've also heard that Admiral Sestak, or former Congressman Sestak, also was terrifically good at this too, and I've been in conversation with him to ask him about in conversations with him to ask him about how he does that too. But it's a great question.
The last question I have is an idiot personal question. It's really an idiot question. The current congressman has written and been written about in the Daily Local and a number of other newspapers saying that he's afraid of his constituents, that they want to, I don't know, shoot him, target his family, and not just because you were in the military, but forgetting about being in the military, would you be afraid of your constituents?
This is my first opportunity to effectively have a town hall of my very own, and because nobody else came, I get to have my own. And so I would very much welcome the chance to talk to people about the issues they care about. I think it's the responsibility of your congressman to be available. I heard one of the people who was running for a position similar to this in a different state and district say that he would commit to having very specific, very regimented meetings so that people knew when they were and when he was going to show up, because I think that's also kind of part of the mystery of when is he going to show up and what day is it, So I absolutely think that this is a really important thing to do. And I've been afraid in my life, and this is not terribly scary.
Jamie Ingram would like to know, in our district, what is the breakdown between Democrats and Republicans?
So I'm going to speak to you kind of about like likely voters. And so in our district, for those who aren't familiar with what it looks like, 4 counties, it's Lebanon, Berks, Chester, and Montgomery counties. It basically spans from around Wayne and goes westward to the Reading area, and they call it the Dragon because it looks like a dragon. And it actually has these little chunks that come out of it. And my dad's an aviator. My mom is actually a cartographer and a geographer, and they collect antique maps. And there's one that has like there be dragons. And so when I talk about the dragons, I think about the little bites out of the dragon's back, and I feel like there be Democrats. You know, that's where all of the Democrats have been cut out of the map. In terms of the disposition of likely voters, it's about 50% Republican, it's about 40% Democrat, and about 10% independent. And as we've talked, you know, with that interesting mix, we still are very capable of thinking with both halves of our mind, and red and blue and purple and that sort of thing. So it's an interesting mix. Good question.
Okay, so this is from John McDevitt. What is your opinion on the issue of net neutrality? Do you believe that people should have the right to internet access and content on the web without the interference of powerful cable telecommunication corporations and ISPs? Thank you.
Yes, I do not support the idea that we should be limiting access to the internet to individuals, and also small businesses will be a consequence will fail as a result of any sort of limitations on the part of big businesses to our access to the internet. That's an easy one for me.
Okay, now, somebody didn't put their name on the card, however, it's really easy to read, so you're gonna like this question. Have you set up dates and locations for fundraising that we can put out?
I love this question. So I am really blessed. I have an enormously talented team. Rahul's in the back. I've got Sarah in the back. Kelly in the back. Charles is somewhere lurking around here. I have a great team, and any one of them can help us afterwards to talk about calendars to make sure that we can make sure you can not only have an opportunity to go to a fundraiser, but also, frankly, host one on your own, maybe a meet and greet or something like that too. But is it a pretty active schedule? Rahul, you want to add to that?
Yeah, we have a fundraiser and meet and greet coming up literally in the next couple weeks, so if you are interested in those, please contact us afterwards, all over the district.
Okay, this is from, and I apologize, I'm gonna wreck this, Molly Mazine.
Yeah, Rosine.
Thank you. Okay, so it's 2 questions. Number 1, would you take a knee if you were a player on the Eagles?
That's a really, really good question. I fought in the military, as did my
can't
father
do
and
it.
my grandfather, for the right for people to make their own choices on that decision. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we as a nation have the ability to choose on our own what that choice would be.
And as a follow-up,
Good
of
answer.
course, that was the serious answer. But the question is, if you were going to be on the Eagles, given your size, how much padding would you need?
I am so excited to be here at this time in our lives when the Eagles, I don't even want to jinx us, you know, might do something amazing. So I don't think I could play. Even I couldn't play basketball either. So
Well,
yeah, I couldn't.
okay.
I couldn't
And
do
she
that.
also wants to know whether or not you support sanctuary cities.
That's also a good question. I believe that this is also a local decision. This is a choice that local places should make. I do believe, as far as I understand it, in the city of Philadelphia, that this is something that is very much supported by the folks who live there. And I think, as you probably heard, I'm a daughter of an immigrant and a refugee, effectively, and I think a lot of the things that exist in the sanctuary cities are in protection of that community, which is really special to me, too.
Okay, Linda, whose last name I can't make out, would like to know if you have any thoughts on dealing with gerrymandering in the state and nationally.
I'm really hopeful that something will come of our angst about gerrymandering, but I'm not very hopeful, to be honest, that anything will come anytime soon. So I'm not like holding my breath hoping that the district will be redrawn to my favor in 2018. I would like to see the resolution of the court case. December 4th, I think, is when the Pennsylvania one will come up for hearing. December 21st, I think, is when they're supposed to be talking about the ruling here in our state. There's some conversation that maybe nationally that the Supreme Court will release their decision, could release it as early as Christmas, which would be really interesting. So there's a lot of stuff that coulda, shoulda, woulda happened. Again, I'm not holding my breath. I don't think it's gonna come to anything in our, maybe even in our lifetimes, but I'm hoping that in the 2020 census that we will have enough conversation that we all will be educated enough to be able to ask for the right things and to be able to redraw the districts so that they appropriately represent us. To the folks who are relatively new in the room, we have 1 million more registered Democrats than we do Republicans in our state. And of the 18 seats that we have, only 5 of them are democratically held. And so that's not fair, and that needs to be changed.
This is yet another person who didn't put his or her name on the card, but whoever wrote this, your penmanship is spectacular. Consumer protection. The current administration is bent on undoing the CFPB. It may succeed. What should Congress do, beginning in 2019, to restore and/or improve regulations and enforcement in the consumer financial protection area?
That is a ginormous, large question. It's funny because Kelly and I, we do this ridiculous process called call time every day, and that is when I get to call literal random strangers and ask them for their financial support for the campaign. And so Kelly's always trying to motivate me, and her latest attempt at motivating me is to ask me to name the most recent atrocity and why I'm running. So today's reason was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And you know, intuitively, I just feel as though that ought to be something that we're nurturing and that we're protecting. But the reality is I don't know enough about it to be able to answer the question with enough teeth on it. I would like to learn more about it so that I could answer that question more aggressively.
For what it's worth, and this just happened about 5 o'clock this evening, the chair of the committee, and this came out of the Dodd-Frank law. It was heralded by Elizabeth Warren, who fought tooth and nail to be able to protect consumers. And Richard Corday resigned, and as per the law, he appointed his second in command, and Trump said, oh no, Mike Bellady, he's got to go and do it, but he's the guy who's in charge of the budget or something like that. Yeah, and how do you get 2 jobs? Anyway, and so just at 5 o'clock today, the courts said that Bellady could be in charge. So,
okay.
that might change.
And that is a really good segue into sort of the Dodd-Frank stuff. That is a point of differentiation between me and my ultimate opponent, Ryan Costello, which is I don't believe that we should be unraveling or undoing a lot of things that frankly got us into this mess to begin with. When B Corporation was just getting started and was just kind of in its infancy as an idea, we really thought it would be a very long runway to get people to understand and buy into this concept of better business. And the collapse of the stock market was pretty much all it took for everybody to get on board really quickly and realize that we needed to have a different way of doing business. And so to watch that get undone, you know, as hard as it was to fight for, was pretty devastating for us.
Now, a completely different topic. This is from Rachel Gray. The 6th District is the proud home of some beautiful natural spaces, yet I live within a mile of a Superfund site. As our Congresswoman, what specific solutions do you have for ensuring that our environment stays protected in a balance with industry, commerce, and development?
Yeah, and I think that is this Jessica? Was that who asked the question?
Rachel.
Rachel. I think Rachel's question is a good one, and I think that that's the right answer, which is a balance. You know, I think the environment is incredibly important and precious to all of us, and we have a responsibility to defend it and to protect it and to hand it over, hopefully in better condition, to the next generation. But it also is within a balance of making sure that we're being respectful of the jobs and industry that is here as well. And to the degree that as a congressman I will have the opportunity to influence things that are happening at this area, I will be making sure that I'm balancing that and also looking forward to make sure that we have the opportunity to advance our economy and our industry to be more respectful of the environment. So some of the stuff that we need to be worried about is making sure that what currently exists is safe and regulated. And right now, I think that there is a lot of stuff that is not being regulated and is not safe. And I've seen some proposals on the part of our Senator Casey that would be worrying about that stuff, and I would be very much in support of that. And specifically, I believe that's called the FRAC Act that he's been talking about. And I think that that's interesting and important legislation to be more transparent with that.
On a completely different topic to you, somebody else is interested in Ryan Costello's email blast. So, in Congressman Costello's newsletter today, he asks, do you agree with President Trump's putting North Korea back on the terrorist list? How would you respond? He didn't write down the 5 choices, but I read it and none of it made any sense. So just one.
None of it made any sense. I'm really alarmed by what's going on in North Korea, and I'm really alarmed with the way that our president is managing this situation. As we talked about, this is some of the stuff that I spent a lot of time worrying about, us being annihilated collectively, and so I'm concerned about it. My impression is as his choice of putting them back on the terror list was not a terribly good idea or a terribly good move. I really do believe that we need to be addressing this issue and many other issues in a more diplomatic way. I think you're seeing the unraveling of our diplomatic corps literally as we speak, and that's one of the things that I think that to the degree that I can influence that, I'd like to help people fill the vacant positions that are in Congress and that sort of thing.
Okay, this is from yet another somebody who didn't sign their name. Costello has significant resources and finances. What are you doing to counter the financial challenge?
Yeah, Democrats tend to not be able to raise as much money as Republicans do. That being said, we're doing a pretty darn good job. We are now in our 3rd quarter. We are aggressively trying to hit something, depends on the day, 3 million, 5 million, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, that kind of thing to me is a little bit unnerving as a businesswoman. It's a big range to hit. But I think that we've put up 3 times the amount of money that the Democrat who ran the last time before has already this early on in the cycle, and we obviously have another 11 months of runway to go. It is one of the things that I'm working, sadly, almost full-time on. Probably 60 hours a week of my time is spent making sure we can finance this campaign.
We have a stack of questions, and they're similar but different, but the bottom line on all of them is healthcare.
Yeah.
Single payer,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to do all the
Yeah.
questions, it's hit the topic.
Yeah, and so I answer this question consistently, which is that I'm a businesswoman and a pragmatist, and I believe right now that the law of the land is the Affordable Care Act, and that I believe that it has certainly some flaws, but right now it's been pretty actively being strangled on the vine by as many people as who have the ability to strangle it can. And so I think it's not being allowed to flourish, and I think there are many things that, should we kind of give it more oxygen, will allow it to be more successful and will allow it to be more effective. Specifically, I would like to see the opportunity for a public option being given. I think a lot of stuff has happened where the opportunities within districts have shrunk, and you don't have the opportunity to choose something within the market, and I'm a market-driven person, and so having a public option in concert with another option, a private option, would be helpful for people to be able to make those choices. It also will allow the market to work freely, so if those folks see options that work better for them, are more effective and more affordable for them, and they happen to be the public option, the gradual change will of course be towards a public option.
What is a public option?
Well, it just is basically a Medicare or Medicaid kind of an option, but publicly available side by side with the existing private options as well. So in markets where we've only got one provider that's currently allowed in that, or still standing in that district, it gives you the opportunity to buy it off of the exchange that's a public option. So that's what I'd like to see there. And then I think the next thing is I think that's the only question, right? It wasn't about improvements to the Affordable Care. It was just single payer. No.
We had a whole bunch of
Okay.
questions. What everybody always wants to know is, how do you feel about single payer? Would
Yeah.
you keep the Affordable Care
Yeah,
Act?
yeah.
Would you continue the subsidies?
Yeah.
The whole,
Yeah.
the whole thing.
So, yeah.
All right. That answer, did anyone want more information on healthcare? Did that answer the question? Excellent. Okay. This is from Lori, IEI, hire here. Okay. Given Administrator Pruitt's rollbacks to the EPA regulations, What would you do to address the challenges to environmental regulation?
So I think one of the things that scares me the most about what's going on at the administrative levels, forget about which part of the administration, is this kind of quest to stop measuring anything and to stop kind of having the ability through performance metrics to know what matters and what moves the needles. And so some of the things that I'm most concerned about with him and also with the Department of Education, a variety of other things, is just this idea that we can just stop talking about these things and stop measuring them and therefore they will go away. And so some of the things that I'd like to see legislated back in is a requirement to be able to report into people like me, hopefully, to be able to, I think Christina Van Poel is here, and one of the things she ran on was this sort of idea that we never measure how many people die of opioid deaths in our area, and I think that that's really important. If we don't measure what's happening in our environment or what's happening in the Department of Education, we will fail.
The next question came from 3 people, so I'm going to put it all together. And what it has to do with is, if elected to Congress, would you reach across the aisle and be willing to be bipartisan with moderate Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, I hope you've seen with my disposition, my background, my temperament, all of those kinds of things, that I really do believe myself to be fundamentally kind of a purple person. I really think what's wrong with our country right now is there's a lot of shrieking from the left and from the right, and a whole lot of not getting along, and nothing good is happening. And so I really do hope that by getting there and being, people ask you all the time, well, what do you think being a veteran, accomplishes or adds to the conversation? What do you think being a woman accomplishes or adds to the conversation? I think that send women to some degree too are really good at that kind of compromise and about understanding how to sit together and talk with each other. And I absolutely welcome the chance to do that.
Okay, this question comes from Cheryl Oshman Lunt, who also, where's Cheryl? Best handwriting all night long.
The nuns must have loved you. Oh, you're a teacher, even better.
Spectacular. Pentagon spending is currently at or above $600 billion. Currently, Congress plans to increase, that spending by $54 billion and cut many domestic programs that directly benefit members of our district community. Would you vote against increasing Pentagon funding, or at least make any increase incumbent on an audit and demonstration of fiscal responsibility?
So that's a really good question. There's an organization, make sure, Rahul, that I get this wrong, Center for a Better Livable World, is that right? Council for a Livable World. You should look it up. It's a really cool organization. And they just recently endorsed me. I don't think we've rolled it out yet. But they have those very kinds of questions. They're a military organization with heritage in the military, but they're looking to try and find ways kind of to mutually disarm people, and also to think about the budgets, military budgets responsibly. And one of the questions they asked me was that question, to make sure that they knew where I stood on that. I don't believe that we should be increasing Pentagon spending, and I do believe, though, that there is a different kind of threat going on right now, and that we should be thinking about what our current threat is. When I was active duty, there was one very different threat than there is now. The wall fell down while I was serving active duty, and everybody sort of looked around trying to figure out what do we do, and they were trying to protect their pots of money, and there were no longer the same kind of concerns from one day literally to the next. And now we feel like we're in the same place. We need to make sure that we're responsibly allocating our budget, our military dollars, to things that really threaten us. And there are lots of them, but they're different all the time.
This question is from Bonnie Whitmer. You might want to take a sip of water and potentially sit down. This is the kind of question that's like a final exam question for a political science course. And in fact, I'm pretty sure
All of the above. A and B only.
Okay. What is your conceptualization of the role of government in terms of balancing your principles with your constituents' needs, your party, and loyalty to your party? Do you want to see it?
Yeah, no. No, I'm good. It's good.
That's actually a good question.
It is a good question. One of the reasons I'm running is that this isn't really about me. It's about about party. in my opinion, some days it's the end of the world. You know, that this is just so important. If you had known me before this election, you would know I'm in my pajamas right now and I'm watching Game of Thrones and I don't even like the phone. You know, this is so important. Our democracy is so fragile and it's in danger right now. And because we're in danger, we're imperiling the globe. And so I think that, I hope that helps you understand the question of where do I stand on party or district or whatever. All of this is because I really care for our country, and I really care for our people, and I really care for our planet, and that's, I hope, helps you understand that question and my perspective.
Bonnie, is that okay?
Whoever you are, Bonnie. Thank you, Bonnie, for such an eloquent question.
Well, I asked that question to Brian Costello, and he said it was esoteric.
Oh.
But I think it's essential, because some people, I really think that Republicans and Democrats see the role of government.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Republicans are less likely to say the role of government is to help those who are
Yeah,
most
yeah.
vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah.
But Democrats are more likely to
I think
see
that's
that.
fair.
So
I think that's true.
it
Yeah.
really, so the question is about what guides you.
Mm-hmm.
How
Mm-hmm.
your principles guide you, your
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
politics guide you, does.
I think the government exists to help the weakest among us in many ways, and I think it also exists to kind of put those things in place that we wouldn't normally support as a capitalistic society that enable all of us to make our way through the world. So.
This is another question without a name. Please share some of your thoughts about campaign reform and finance.
So the first thing that I would want to do is, of course, there's this ruling, Citizens United, which has really destroyed us. There's really not a whole lot that Congress can do about that immediately, but what Congress can do is ask people, demand a transparency in those dark money, in the independent expenditure is the other euphemism, you know, for it that sounds a little less nasty than dark money. But at least knowing where that money is coming from would be a step in the right direction. And so that's probably the first thing that could be done in that particular area.
Jessica, you stole my question. Can I pose it again? You stole your question. I was going to ask her when she was. Did you do that earlier?
Yeah.
You stole my question.
She turned it in and then you asked
Give
it.
that woman another card, please.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just talk for a minute about your view of the Second Amendment?
Guns. I believe that, again, very similar to my answer about taking a knee, I believe that people have the right to have guns and to collect and to hunt and to protect. I also believe that there are limits and there are things that can be done to help us be more safe, and that there are controls that can be helped, that can help us. And so I think that I share probably 80% of us in our community the same opinion of what can be done to be able to more safely help people be protected. I'm unique in that I had the opportunity to serve in the military. I also have had the opportunity to serve in the classroom of Simon Gratz, where there were guns in the classroom, you know, and those kinds of two experiences have really shaped a little bit of how I feel about that particular issue.
What about military weapons?
Yeah, I'd like to see that not be a thing.
Okay, this is an interesting question, and I don't work on your campaign, but if I did, I'd say, considering saying that you don't want to answer it right now. Because what it says is, discuss, and once again from a nameless person, discuss Ryan Costello's weaknesses, strengths, votes, positions, and contrast your positions and views. And I would recommend that it's an interesting question, but that involves things like campaign strategy, compare and contrast things that would happen in a debate, and et cetera. But if you want to, without giving away anything.
Well, I'll talk about some of the stuff that's really present, you know, that's current, right? So this is a compare and contrast, Ryan Costello on healthcare, Chrissy Houlihan on healthcare. Ryan Costello 8 times voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. 1 time he voted not to repeal it. And that, to me, indicates who Ryan Costello is and what he represents and who he's beholden to. Similarly, on the tax bill, he also voted for the current version of the House tax bill, which I think is an atrocity for our district and not reflective of who we are as a people, and clearly an indicator of who it is that he represents right now. And so I'd be happy to compare myself to him on that.
Okay, now, this is a question, a number of questions that were asked that are generally state questions, they're not federal questions, but this one is in your wheelhouse since you've worked in education. And from another nameless person, do you believe in public schools, charter schools, and how you would fix education problems, understanding that education is state?
It is, yeah, and it's a really big issue. Fixing education is a pretty big issue. So yes, I absolutely am firmly a supporter of public education. A strong public education is most of what I benefited from. I got the opportunity to go to about 8 or 9 different public schools over the course of my life, and then ended up my career, my academic career, being on scholarship for the rest of my education. And so I'm a product of public schools and an enormous supporter of them. I do believe that there are some cases, very limited cases, where some charter schools, nonprofit charter schools, are helpful in communities. I don't necessarily believe that it's in our community that that's the case, but I hope that's helpful there.
And as somebody else asked this, and once again, this is a state question, it's not a federal question, but you do work in education and you live here. And it says, is there a better way to fund public education other than property tax? And it's certainly just state, not federal. It's the state that funds.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a way in which a world where we could envision federally funding our education system. I can comment on, having worked at Springboard and having worked at Gratz, that some of the federal funding that is ongoing through our school system is not terribly effectively managed or legislated, and I'm hoping that that will be something that I can help on. A good example is Title I funding, which is really very well intentioned and really, really important money, but really horribly legislated and horribly managed. And so that's where I'm hoping to be helpful.
And then we have 2 questions on the House Republican tax plan, which is, of course, different from the Senate plan. They have to come together. But the question is, how do you feel about, I can't even read it, but something about over $500,000 in corporations, and the other one has to do with, what would you like to see in a tax bill?
So, yeah, and so when I comment about the current House bill, and it is kind of a moving picture and a moving target, I think they just did something on the Senate side as I was driving over here. Let's talk about the House bill to my understanding of what it looks like right now. We sit in a district that is on average about 40 years old, that on average has an income of $70,000, so quite high for the national average. We are fairly well educated and we really value our education. And so we're relatively speaking old, we're relatively speaking well off, we're relatively speaking interested in education. And we also live in a very expensive part of the country, where our housing costs are quite high compared to other parts of the country. And so the current bill that is being put forward and that Representative Costello voted for, basically, if you could line up bad things for our community, has that in it. And so, starting from the beginning with sort of we're pretty old people here in the 6th Congressional District, medical expenses and deductions, no longer can be itemized according to the bill. We have really expensive housing. Anytime it's over $10,000 in taxes, you're no longer going to be itemizing that. And for a lot of people, that is an issue. It's an expensive area to live in. Education, the thing that's most offensive to me, 2 things. One is deducting the interest on your student loans, not allowed anymore. Another one, which could not be more reprehensible, is $250 credits for teachers to be able to write off their school supplies. Could not be more nasty, to be put into this bill. For those of us who value education, who value our teachers, and particularly in our district, I think the largest employer our teachers are in our area, so that's really important. And so all of those things in this bill are just really super offensive. And the only thing that I can come up with is that And if you look in New Jersey, if you look in New York, all of the Republican representatives actually voted against this. And if you look at New Jersey and New York, those districts, you'll see they look a lot like Pennsylvania's 6th. And the idea that our guy just didn't represent us, he represented somebody else, is really intriguing to me.
Okay, the last few questions here relate to local things, which again are not congressional. The first one has to do with the fracking ban by the Delaware River Basin Commission. So just in general, how do you feel about fracking? Understanding it's a state issue, not a federal issue.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about that with our conversation about the environment, which is that it's one of those things that I'd like to see more significantly regulated. It's one of those things that I'd like to see, if we're going to be doing it, we're taxing each other on it so that we have access to capital as a result of the poor behaviors that we're exhibiting. So those are the same kind of things. You know, environmental responsibility is really important, but also with respect to the economy.
And then the last question on this card is Mariner 2, if you're familiar with that. I mean, it's a local issue.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
Congress has nothing to do
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion?
Similar to what we talked about with Casey's, you know, kind of frack act kind of thing, making sure that we know what's in the effluents, that we're safely building the pipeline. I actually had the chance to drive by it. I don't remember why I was that far out, but this week I was that far out driving through all of the carving up of the pipelines and things like that. Making sure that we're legislating to the degree that we're able to is really, really important.
Okay, I promised earlier, I promised your campaign manager, wouldn't make you talk straight, you know, answer questions in an hour. So if you want to make a closing sentence, and please remember to plug these items.
Vanna. So there's these things that you really probably want and need. These are pledge cards, voter pledge cards. So I believe if you fill these out, they'll be coming back to you to make sure that you've actually pledged to vote. There's, I think, voter registration cards here where we will not win if we don't vote. So take them home, distribute them, put them in stockings, you know, whatever you think is appropriate to make sure that people are voting. And I really do appreciate the chance to exercise my brain with you all. It's really, really important what we're doing together, and I know that it's not what you should be doing with your evening. And thank you for being here with me.
Thank you.
Selfies and who wants a file card? All right, all right.
Chrissy Houlihan for Congress with the FOR.